Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about unemployment. Unemployment is a very important macroeconomic topic. When you think about the economic development of any economy, or the role that policymakers are playing, or the way policymakers are thinking about changing the landscape of an economy, unemployment is one of the forefronting idea. So, in this chapter, we are going to learn about what unemployment is, how unemployment is actually calculated, as we will see that behind this singular concept of unemployment lies a lot of calculations, a lot of data collections, a lot of philosophical issues, a lot of empirical issues that has to be dealt with before we can talk about unemployment. We are going to also look at the various kinds of unemployment that exist in an economy, because not all unemployment are the same. People can become unemployed for a variety of factors. Then we're going to conclude our discussion today by looking at how policy can sometimes facilitate or prevent unemployment. So, three part. So let's start with looking at what unemployment is. Unemployment obviously is a labor market statistics, and the labor market statistics that are used to calculate unemployment is basically collected through a survey, and the survey is called Current Population Survey. The Current Population Survey is carried out by Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. They are a very large and important organization in USA, where every month they sort of collect data from a very large sample survey, where what they do is they basically ask questions, and based on the question set that a responder responds to, the person is classified either as employed or unemployed, or sometimes not in the labor force. Now, not everyone is interviewed or surveyed, or even if somebody is surveyed, there has to be some criteria that one is to follow before that person could be considered in the labor force. So the first criteria that one is to satisfy is this idea of age limit. So now let's therefore define working age population. The working age population in USA are any person that is aged 16 years and over, and less than 65, who is not jailed, or who is not in a hospital, or they are not institutionalized, and armed labor force, the US armed labor force. If you are not part of any of these category, you are considered part of the working age population. So that's the first question that are being asked. How old are you? Are you mentally sick, or are you in military? If you are not, then you are going to be considered for the set of questions which will characterize you whether you are employed or unemployed. Okay, so a person will be employed if during the week before the survey, a person has worked at least 1 hour in a paid job, or for 15 hours in an unpaid family business. The person might not be working, but who had jobs from which they were temporarily absent. So you could be, just taking a break on vacation or something like that, but you're still employed. Notice how easy in US calculation for you to become employed. All you have to do is just work 1 hour with pay. Now, if you are not employed, you can be classified as unemployed if you satisfy the following requirement. By the way, all this information or all these questions will be asking you what were you doing in the last couple of weeks. So a person will be classified as unemployed if during the week before the survey a person did not have any employment, the person were available for work, And third, the person has made some effort to look for a job. And if the person has been not looking for job, the person has to be waiting to be recalled to a job from which they had been laid off. So remember, for a person to be considered unemployed, the three very important category conditions have to be satisfied. He first of all cannot have a job. He has to be available for work, and he has to make full effort to find a job, or has to be waiting to join a job. Let's look at some examples. Let's look at the example that we're looking at right now. So Amy is working part-time with pay. Tavares is on temporary layoff, who is included in the Bureau of Labor Statistics as in the employed category. So to begin with, Tavares actually doesn't have a job. He is temporarily laid off. So that means he might be recalled again. We really don't know, but if he is, he's still unemployed, right? But Amy, she's working part-time. She could be working like an hour, but she's getting paid from that, right? So she's definitely employed. So the answer is only Amy. Let's look at another question. The second question is going like this. Who of the following would necessarily be included in the Bureau of Labor Statistics unemployed category? A. Huey, who did not work during the previous 4 weeks. Dewey, who tried to find a new employment during the previous 4 weeks. Louis, who was an unpaid worker during the previous 4 weeks. And none of the above is correct. The answer is kind of confusing. So let's look at that, right? A. Huey did not work during the previous 4 weeks. Does it necessarily mean that? So I guess there is a typological mistake here. I think it should be all of the above is correct. And then the answer would be D, because Huey has not been working during the previous 4 weeks, so he could be classified as unemployed. Dewey, who tried to find new employment during the previous 4 weeks, so that means he was also unemployed. And Louis was an unpaid worker during the previous 4 weeks, so obviously Dewey was unemployed as well. Okay. Another question. Andrea would be considered unemployed if she is not working and looking for a part-time job. So you can look at the other questions that we have in the problem set. The next concept is called labor force. So labor force is basically gives you an idea about what is happening to the people who are working and what is happening to the people who are not working. So labor force is the sum of people who are employed plus people who are unemployed. It's a very basic idea. The next calculation is called unemployment rate, which is probably the most important macroeconomic variable that we see policymakers talk about. Unemployment rate is calculated as follows. Unemployment rate is you take the number of unemployed people, you divide that by the labor force, which is the sum of employed and unemployed, and you multiply that by 100. So the next one is called labor force participation rate, which is you take the total labor force of the economy and you divide the adult population. And you use the adult population to divide labor force, and you multiply that by 100. So each of these calculations have a philosophical insight in it, right? So for example, the unemployment rate tells you what fraction of the labor force is not working, so that's a very important calculation. Labor force participation rate tells you what fraction of the adult population is actually active for job, active for work. So the labor force participation rate is indeed a very important macroeconomic variable because it tells you how productive the economy could be. So at any point of time, we can think about our adult population being consisted of the following categories. We can think of the adult population having three category of people, right? People who are employed, people who are unemployed, and people who are not in the labor force. Labor force is the sum of employed and unemployed. Notice that in 2012, this is actual data. The number of people who are employed was 142.5 million, unemployed was 12.5, and notice that people who are neither considered employed nor unemployed, their number was quite large. Okay, so that's that. You can take a moment to look at the numbers that are included in this table and convince yourself that you can calculate this: labor force participation rate, employment population ratio, rate of unemployment, and the only thing that I want to talk about from this table is that people who are not in the labor force can be of many different kinds. So if you are a household worker, like you work at home without any pay, you are not in the labor force. If you are a student, you are not in the labor force. If you are retired, you are not in the labor force. If you are disabled, you are not in the labor force. If you are in the military, army, or armed forces, you are not in the labor force. If you are institutionalized, you are also not in the labor force. So there are a lot of unemployed. There are a lot of people who are not in the labor force category. So that's interesting. So let's now look at another problem. So in June 2009, Bureau of Labor Statistics reported, so adult population is 234.9, labor force 154, employment is 141.6. So based on that, you have to calculate the unemployment numbers. So we know that the labor force consists of unemployed plus employed. So the unemployed, and we know what the labor force is, it's 154. Now, so the unemployment would be labor force minus employed. That would be 12.4. Then unemployment rate would be unemployed people divided by labor force. So it's going to be 12.4 divided by 154. Answer is D. So you should be able to calculate these. Okay, so now let us, so what we have done so far is we have taken a look at how employment and unemployment categories are calculated, who is considered employed, who is considered unemployed. What we are going to do now is try to figure out, some alternative measurement of unemployment, because unemployment is a fairly complicated concept. The reason why we want to, get an idea about unemployment is that a lot of people argue that unemployment is not properly measured because there are a lot of ambiguity about how unemployment should be calculated and how it is actually calculated in reality. We are going to talk about two major problems of the traditional unemployment categorization. The first one is called, or talk about this problem of marginally attached worker. So who is a marginally attached worker? A marginally attached worker is a person who does not have a job, okay, is available and willing to work, so that seems like he's unemployed, has not made any specific efforts to find a job within the previous 4 weeks, now that's strange, but has looked for work sometime in the recent past. So this is a very problematic definition. So this guy doesn't have a job, is available and willing to work, but again is not looking for a job, right? And probably has looked for a job in the past, could not find a job, became discouraged, and that will make him marginally attached worker. One very important category of these marginally attached workers are called discouraged worker. A discouraged worker is a marginally attached worker, obviously, who has not made specific efforts to find a job within the previous 4 weeks because previous unsuccessful attempts were discouraging. This is a very important issue because in May 2013, 753,000 people were discouraged worker according to BLS statistics, and almost 1 million people, 1,372,000 people were marginally attached workers. So if we add them to the actual labor force, unemployment rate in USA in in May 2013 was very high. It was 8.8%. So we have to understand this. Another issue about unemployment is that sometimes we talk about these part-time workers, and according to most of the people, our employment and unemployment categorization really cannot formally explain these part-time workers. So who are part-time workers? People who are not full-time workers. So full-time workers are people who usually work 30 hours or more in a given week. Part-time workers are people who usually work less than 35 hours a week. And there can be situations where a person might be part-time workers for economic reasons. What does that mean? It means that sometimes during recessions or during bad times, firms might want to not really fire everyone, because then it becomes difficult to find back people to work for them. But they reduce the number of hours these people can work, so that the firms do not really have to pay them a lot of benefits, like health benefits and so on. So part-time workers for economic reasons really make it difficult for calculating these numbers in the first place. Okay, so labor market statistics are complicated, but nevertheless it's a very important macroeconomic variable. Economists spend a lot of time trying to understand various aspects of the labor of the unemployment, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start looking at various aspects of unemployment, first by looking at the trend of the labor market, where we notice that there appears to be a trend in the unemployment rate. The trend is that anytime there is a recession in the economy, unemployment rate grows up dramatically. So notice that during the Great Depression of 1920s, unemployment rate was 25%, which is unthinkable, right? Then there were 1972-75 recession, 81-82 recession, 1991 recession, 2008-9 recession, and during every recession you would see a major jump in the unemployment rate. So sometimes we call unemployment a counter-cyclical variable. A counter-cyclical variable is a variable that moves opposite to economic growth. Anytime GDP goes up, unemployment rate goes down. Anytime GDP goes down, during recessions, unemployment rate goes up. So that's a very important empirical observation about unemployment. The next one that we are going to talk about is this trend in the labor force participation rate, not for the entire population but based on gender. So this is one of my favorite picture. Okay, so what we are looking at in this particular picture is that when we look at the labor force participation rate between men and women, we see that in the 60s, the labor force participation rate among men was obviously very high, and among women it was very low, and the gap between the labor force participation rate between men and women is shrinking. You can see that. In 2015, the gap between labor force participation rate between male and female are surprisingly small. There is a name for this in labor economics. Economists who really look at labor market statistics, it's called gender reversal in the labor market, which means that in the labor market it appears that the trend in the labor force participation rate among male and female is changing dramatically. So that's an important aspect. Please remember that. Another complicated aspect of the trend of unemployment is that we need to talk a little bit about spell and duration of unemployment. Now, spell is the number of times you become unemployed. Okay, so most spells of unemployment are short, so the number of times that you you think about the spells of unemployment, it tells you how long are you gonna be unemployed. So what we see in the USA is that most of the unemployment observed at a given point of time, has a longer duration. But again, in USA, if you lose a job, it becomes quite easy for you to find a job pretty quickly. So we say that in USA the spells have shorter duration. The spells are short, and the duration is large. Okay. Let us now spend a little bit of time looking at various kinds of unemployment that exist in an economy. As I mentioned, not all unemployment are the same. Some unemployment are different than others. Okay, so now what we're going to do now is we are going to talk about the various types of unemployment that can exist in an economy. There are basically three kinds of unemployment that exist in an economy. Basically, they are the source of unemployment, right? The first one is what we call frictional unemployment. So let's look at the definition. Frictional unemployment is the unemployment that arises from normal labor turnover, right? So in any labor market, people will be coming and going. People will be leaving one job because they don't like the work environment. The manager will fire some workers because the manager doesn't like the worker. Sometimes a worker might feel like, hey, I really deserve a better job, deserve a better wage or salary or something. So there will always be some kind of mismatch between the demand side and the supply side. People will always be looking for job. Owners will always be trying to fire jobs. This mismatch really creates frictional unemployment. One could argue that the main reason for this frictional unemployment is imperfect information. When a worker is hired, the owner really doesn't have a good idea about the worker, and the worker really doesn't have a good idea about the owner. And this mismatch can always give rise to unemployment. Some frictional unemployment is obviously inevitable. You can understand that because there are always some sectoral shifts. Some firms start with one objective as what they want to produce, then they change their mind and they want to fire workers and they want to hire some more people. There are always changes in the demand for labor among different firms. Economy is always changing. Jobs are created in one sector, jobs are destroyed in the other sector. So people are always moving around. Now, another aspect of another problem that really gives rise to frictional unemployment is this idea of job search. So job search is the time it takes for a person to find and look for a job, right? And you can see that job search is a natural process of finding a job, and as long as you are searching for a job, you are unemployed, right? Some people take less time to find a job, some people take more time to find a job. So that could be really something that could create unemployment, right? One also has to understand that unemployment depends on your own view about the job, right? Different people have different skills, different people have different taste, and these all could really make some people to be unemployed for a shorter period of time, which really is not because they don't have the skill, but because they probably have too much skill. So it's a very interesting concept. Now the most serious kind of so you can think that frictional unemployment is existing in economy, but it's not really that serious. Or to put it in a simple terms, there is nothing you can do to really solve the frictional unemployment problem. But when you think about the second category of the unemployment problem, which we call structural unemployment, it is a very serious one. So structural unemployment is the unemployment that arises when changes in technology or information or international competition changes the skill needed to perform jobs or change the location of the job. So this is a situation where there are some changes in the economy, sectoral changes in the economy where certain skills are no longer required. So the people who had those jobs really got fired, they became unemployed. But the most important of this aspect of this unemployment is that once they become unemployed, they cannot really gain their job back. So as an example, in the 70s, a lot of banks introduced teller machines. So previously the tellers that were working in place of these machines became unemployed, and they really could not gain their job back. So that's a problem. Structural unemployment basically reflects the mismatch between your skill and the job that you're looking for. And in most of the cases, unless you have the money to go back to the school and get some skill, this gap cannot be fulfilled. Which means that if you have a skill which does not meet or match with the jobs that are available in the economy, you might be unemployed for a long period of time. Sometimes structural unemployment could be as a result of not skill mismatch, but because of some kind of structural problem in the economy, such as minimum wage law, something that we're going to look at in a minute. The third category of unemployment is called cyclical unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is the fluctuating unemployment over the business cycle, meaning that during recessions, unemployment rate goes up, during boom, unemployment rate goes down. This is basically due to general business economic activities. There are some business that does well at some time, does not do well at other times. So think about a person who is working for an ice cream parlor. The ice cream parlor sells ice cream in the summer, so the guy is employed during summer. During winter, the ice cream parlor is closed, so the worker is fired. So there could be a seasonal pattern or a cyclical pattern in the unemployment rate. But when we talk about cyclical unemployment, we basically talk about how unemployment changes with booms and recessions. For example, during the recession of 2008-2009, many workers were laid off just because of the business cycle activity. Okay. Let's look at some examples now. So question number 1. So if Samantha quits her job voluntarily and actively searches for another work, she is obviously considered a fictionally unemployed person. So notice that the key word here is that she has lost the job. She has quit the job voluntarily, meaning that she really did not have a skill mismatch problem. She had the job, but she simply didn't like it. But at the same time, she's looking for a job. So she is frictionally unemployed. The next question is Sam Jackson voluntarily quits one job, possesses marketable skills and expects to find a new job in a few weeks. Again, Mr. Jackson is going to be considered fictionally unemployed. Number 3, Jamal, who is now 54, lost his job. He has very specialized skills that are no longer in demand. So Jamal is obviously structurally unemployed. So that's interesting. Okay, so we have just looked at 3 different kinds of unemployment: structural unemployment, frictional unemployment, and cyclical unemployment. Based on what we have talked about, it seems like structural unemployment is the most serious one. Frictional unemployment is something that always exists in an economy, and cyclical unemployment only happens during recessions. Now, all of these give rise to another concept of unemployment, which is called natural unemployment. So what is natural unemployment? Although I would argue that there is nothing natural about being unemployed. Natural unemployment is the unemployment that arises from frictions and structural changes when there is no cyclical unemployment. So what we are saying is that when we add frictional unemployment and structural unemployment, which we think are natural to happen, the sum of these two are called natural rate of unemployment. And natural rate of unemployment is the natural unemployed people divided as a percentage of labor force. So this is exactly how we calculate unemployment rate. Okay, now we want to spend a little bit of time trying to understand the implication or significance of unemployment in a macroeconomy. We're going to motivate that by looking at the relationship between unemployment and output, potential GDP, something that I already talked about. Remember, potential GDP is when all the resources of the economy are optimally utilized. Obviously, unemployment is a situation where the resources of the economy are not properly utilized. So we have learned before that whenever the resources of the economy are not properly utilized, the real GDP will be smaller than potential GDP. Now, whenever resources are not properly utilized, we say that it gives rise to unemployment. So therefore, we can say that whenever unemployment rate is above the natural rate, meaning that there are some extra unemployment, like cyclically unemployed people, the potential, the real GDP will be below the potential GDP, and other way around, and vice versa. Another way to look at the implication of unemployment on the economy is to define something called output gap. Output gap equals real GDP minus potential GDP, and expressed as a percent of the potential, as a percentage of the potential GDP. So if we look at the data, which is below, we will see that when the unemployment rate is above the natural rate, the real GDP is below the potential GDP, and the output gap is negative. And obviously the opposite is true. So let's look at whether we can see that in the data. Okay. Let's pick a year, right? So let's pick a year. Let's pick 1990 recession, right? So during the 1990 recession, you can see clearly that the unemployment rate during the recession was above the natural rate. So if the unemployment rate is above the natural rate, we know that it is going to cause a potential GDP, real GDP to fall below potential GDP, and when the potential GDP rises above the real GDP, it is going to cause the output gap to go down. So that makes sense, and you can see that the theory is consistent with our graphical interpretation. So that's good. Another very important concept. So that's important. So remember that natural rate of unemployment really can be useful to figure out how unemployment affects the macroeconomy and how output gap is affected by the unemployment rate. So just to strengthen our understanding about the natural rate of unemployment, let's look at a question where unemployment rate is the natural rate of unemployment rate is the answer is D, amount of unemployment that the economy normally experiences. This idea of normally is actually not normal, but it's what we expect to happen in the economy. So some unemployment is inevitable. Some unemployment is inevitable. And that inevitable unemployment rate is called natural rate of unemployment. So we have just done two things. We have first defined what unemployment is. We have looked at various ways to calculate unemployment rate. We have looked at some alternative measurement of unemployment. And then we have looked at various kinds of unemployment that exist in an economy, basically three kinds. We are now going to conclude this chapter by looking at the effect of policy on unemployment, right? In future chapters, we are going to argue that government policy plays a very important role in changing the macroeconomic dynamics. One of the most important way through which government policy affect the macroeconomy is that some government policies have a direct effect on the unemployment rate of the economy. And let's try to understand how government policies can have both positive and negative impact on the unemployment rate. Let's start with some positive ones. The first one is what we call government and job search, where government have programs that facilitate job search in an economy. Government has government-run employment agencies that and also public training organizations that really train people and also help them prepare their resume and also help them to really find a job, right? You can imagine that as a result of these government organizations, job search becomes smaller and people can quickly find jobs. So one important implications of the government job search agencies that they could radically reduce natural rate of unemployment by reducing the frictional unemployment. So that's one important government policy which has a positive effect on reducing unemployment. The next one that we're going to talk about is called unemployment insurance. Now, unemployment insurance is probably one of the most hotly debated government policy. There are two sides of the story, right? Some people argue that unemployment benefit is needed because if you don't have a job and you have a large family, you need some kind of income to really help you go by and help you to find a job. So unemployment benefit is basically designed to give you some kind of compensation, almost like 50% of your salary for the first 20 weeks that you're unemployed. After that, you're on your own. Now that's like the argument in favor of having unemployment insurance. There is a very strong argument against having unemployment insurance as well. Economists argue that this government program, the unemployment insurance, really partially protects workers' income when they become unemployed, and they basically increase the frictional unemployment rather than reduce it. How? So if I have unemployment benefit and I am looking for a job, I might take more time to find a job. I might take more job search. I might spend more time on job search because I am kind of secured because I have this government insurance program. So a lot of economists argue that government insurance program really increases unemployment rather than reduces it. The last policy that we're going to look at, that is again highly we are going to look at two more. The one that is probably the most controversial government policy that has a direct effect on unemployment is minimum wage law. So just a quick note, minimum wage law sets a minimum wage that firms can pay to their workers, right? So sometimes that minimum wage rate could be set above the market clearing wage. If that does happen, it can indeed create unemployment. So let's look at this from the graph that is being provided. So imagine that the market equilibrium wage rate is WT and market minimum wage is set above the market equilibrium wage. So at the minimum wage which is set above the market equilibrium wage, so remember this is very similar to like the price floor, a concept that we have looked at before. At that minimum wage, labor demand is LS and labor supply is LS. So you can see clearly that the amount of labor supply is higher than amount of labor demand. So there is a mismatch between labor and supply. Since supply is greater than demand, there is an excess supply of workers in this market. But the most important problem is that there is no way these excess supply of workers could be absorbed in the economy. So they will be unemployed, and they will be unemployed for a long time. So, and all this has been created as a result of minimum wage rate set above the market equilibrium wage. So that obviously is something to think about. The final policy that we are going to look at is this idea of allowing labor unions to collectively bargain against with the employers, right? It is highly debated because again there is a argument in favor of having this kind of collective bargaining, because economists and non-economist policymakers argue that you need to give labor some degree of confidence, some degree of power, so that they are not exploited by the workers, by the owners, right? The argument against collective bargaining is that collective bargain can help workers to bargain with the owners and raise the wage. And when the wage is raised more than what the employers were willing to pay, employers are going to hire less workers. As a result, it is going to create unemployment. Now, it also argues that the collective bargaining sort of creates inequality between the workers, because workers who are part of the union really enjoys the higher wage that were secured by the union, but people who are not part of the union, they really do not gain anything. They actually are hard, because if you are part of a labor union, it is very difficult to fire you. If you are not, it is very easy to fire you. So anytime the employers, the owners want to downsize their production or size, these non-unionized workers are the first candidates. Okay, so that sort of covers our discussion about unemployment. If you have any question, please get in touch with me. Thank you very much.